We'll be doing vertical analysis. What is that? It's just another way to look at ratio analysis, right? We're trying to see, and I'm pretty sure I've given you guys the guidance for this week, so you do have that. There's your example. But let's talk about ratio analysis for a minute, okay? So the first thing I want to do before you even go here is I want to share a video that is in my playlist on ratio analysis, very popular video, because this is a subject that constantly comes up. And the one thing you want to remember about ratio analysis, and let's use that as a code word. This week's code word is ratio analysis, or code words. Ratio analysis. Okay. So I'm going to go to my playlist and open up this video. Now, the thing you want to know about, hold on, so the thing you want to know about ratio analysis, the most important thing, is that you have to look at it like a doctor looks like at a blood test. You can't just look at it absolute, right? Now we know there's some things when you get on your blood test you just don't want them, right? High sugar, whatever, cholesterol, of course. It has to be looked in the context of the patient. For instance, the way a doctor would gauge a blood test for somebody later in life is way different than they would for a child or a young person, right? And the same thing, or here's another thing. Like, for instance, my ancestors came along, they came here a long time ago in the 1890s. But when they got here, they we both sides of my family came from the same place in Italy, Calabria, which is if you know anything, if you know anything about Italy, it's the foot of Italy, southern Italy. So anyway, in that particular part of the world, there's a trait anemia, which means people are born with a certain anemia that they could live with because it's been passed down, unfortunately, through generations, but it has to be looked at, but it's not something that's fatal. Anyway, so if I go for a blood test back in the day when I was a kid, I would have lower red blood cell count. But after a while, they determined that that was the cause. Not that I'm bleeding or anything like that. So, bottom line, you have to take an iron pill occasionally. She just reminded me to take one today, and then you're fine, and then it's fine. So, long story short, if they didn't make that adjustment, like ratio analysis, you would look at it like this guy has an issue. And this is the thing with ratio analysis. So, for instance, and we're going to watch the video together, when you look at things like accounts receivable, which is how fast do we collect the money we lend to customers to buy our product, naturally you're going to want to see it would be intuitive to say, well, I'd like to see a number where the accounts receivable gets collected sooner. That makes sense. I mean, why not? Who wouldn't want to collect their money sooner? But if you've been running a business for a long time and your clients have been paying you, so all your clients are loyal clients that pay you, say, in 30 days, and they've worked out their accounting to make that work. And then you get some new manager who says, well, let's make it 20 days. You could lose clients. That's an example of you have to be careful how you view this stuff. Another thing is asset turnover. What's asset turnover? Asset turnover is how often do I make revenues on the assets that I own? Now, if I have two companies and one has a much higher asset turnover than the other, I could, if I don't understand ratio analysis, I could immediately assume that the first company that turns it over faster is a more efficient company and they must be doing better. They must have better management. But if I look deeper, I realize that they have old assets. So the denominator is small and the assets turn over quicker. But what else does it mean? Well, I'm going to need to replace these things eventually. It's going to cost money, or they may break down. Where company B might have a slower asset turnover, but they have brand new assets. So all these things have to be accounted for. Okay, so let's watch this video together. And it's my video, so it's my instruction. I'm not showing it. Not that it matters, but I like my own I like my own content. Just one thing, maybe Tammy, you can help me. Do you see on the screen it says overview of ratio analysis?
I do not have my glasses on, but I do see that you're sharing your screen.
You see
Financial ratio analysis. Yes, I do see it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let's start it up. Okay, this is Professor Strafacci, and I wanted to go over a list of financial ratios. I found this website. There's a ton of websites that talk about financial ratios. Obviously, this is one that I'm using, but you could look at just about anything. And in of course, our textbook is most important. But just to go over how to look at financial ratios, I want you to understand that you have to look at ratios in an absolute sense, not in an absolute sense, in a relative sense. And I spoke there for a minute. So, like a doctor would look at a blood test. There are obviously some numbers the doctor doesn't want to see, but on the other hand, there's no question that they have to take into account the whole patient. I mean, the history, where the patient's at, what they're dealing with. You know, a white blood cell count may not matter if you're in the middle of a flu. It might matter if there shouldn't be an issue. And why am I saying that? It's because when you're looking at financial ratios, you want to take in a more holistic approach. So, for instance, you know, you have your profitability ratios, and you have your current ratios, and obviously I want to stay current, and it always seems like it's a good idea to have more current assets, and it is. But then again, you have to look at it in the context of the business you're in and what your competitors are doing. It's not just an absolute number. None of these numbers are absolute. So, for instance, on receivables, it might always look like a good idea to
touch
collect
anything.
receivables
I have
quicker.
no issue logging
but
into the one
If
class
you're
that I have
pushing
to
your
go
clients
to
too
on
hard to pay
Mondays.
their bills,
It's just
they may
this
decide to,
class.
you know, decamp and go to another competitor that offers better terms. So while it's a good idea, you want to also be able to sit down with each of your clients and
Yep.
decide if it's the best idea to have push them for another 10 days or 15 days to make those numbers look better. Another one would be inventory turnover. Obviously. Hi, I stepped off for a minute. Is everything okay? Hello? I heard someone talking. Is there a problem with the video? Just let me know.
It's oh God,
Please.
where is it in here?
Somebody's mic was open.
02
They were talking, getting assistance.
0523.
Yeah, I think Jacqueline's mic is open.
Oh, okay.
Jacqueline Wilson.
I'm sorry. What's that? Oh, God.
Ever since I started this course.
Jacqueline, your mic is open.
I'm on my third week. So
I don't think she can hear us. That's why she's not responding.
Okay, I muted it. All right. Want me to start it up again? I had to step off for a second. I had to remember to take my iron pill, believe it or not. You want me to start it up again? Please tell me.
I think we were following. I was following you pretty well.
Okay, I'll go back a little.
Thank you.
No problem. Where the patient's at, what they're dealing with. You know, a white blood cell count may not matter if you're in the middle of a flu. It might matter if there shouldn't be an issue. And why am I saying that? It's because when you're looking at financial ratios, you want to take in a more holistic approach. So, for instance, you know, you have your profitability ratios, and you have your current ratios, and obviously I want to stay current, and it always seems like it's a good idea to have more current assets, and it is. But then again, you have to look at it in the context of the business you're in and what your competitors are doing. It's not just an absolute number. None of these numbers are absolute. So, for instance, on receivables, it might always look like a good idea to collect your receivables quicker, but if you're pushing your clients too hard to pay their bills, they may decide to, you know, decamp and go to another competitor that offers better terms. So while it's a good idea, you want to also be able to sit down with each of your clients and decide if it's the best idea to have push them for another 10 days or 15 days to make those numbers look better. Another one would be inventory turnover. Obviously, it looks like a great idea if I turn over inventory quicker, That's another one, inventory turnover. That's a big number, inventory turnover. Because it says, well, how quick am I getting this inventory? Because remember, inventory is dead money. There's no question about it. Any business person will tell you. If you're carrying inventory, and if any of you have like a private business or you work in a business that carries inventory, you know you want to get that inventory moving. You don't want it sitting on the shelves. So yeah, inventory turnover is an important metric. But here's another example. Well, if I have two companies and one company's inventory turnover is better, and I immediately assume that they're better managers, I have to look a little deeper. Maybe they're not carrying enough inventory. Because even though inventory is their money, it's a necessity. Now think about when you go to buy a car. We've all been there, right? If I go to a dealer that has just a couple of cars, chances are I may not buy the car there. You know, I don't see what I like. But when you go to a dealer that has a nice selection, you're going to see maybe a color, or an amenity, something that attracts you. And it's going to, same thing when you go shopping in the store. If they have more selection, you're going to probably be more apt to buy that product. So inventory turnover, again, could be a tricky metric because on the one hand, we want to see a good inventory turnover. On the other one, we want to make sure they carry enough inventory. I once did a consultant. I consulted for a company down here in New Jersey where the guy who owned it was really a awful guy. And I wish we never had that account. It was a guy he just wish, it was tough to get paid for from. He just was, he was going through a horrible divorce. He was just not a nice man either. And he ran a business where he delivered paper goods to the restaurants and mostly restaurants, I would think. Paper goods and plastic wrapping and things like that to all these different restaurants along the shore and even into Manhattan. But most of his work is down the shore. And he bragged about, he said, oh, I turn over inventory 52 times a year. And like, as a guy who's been doing this for 52 times a year, I never heard a number like that. But so the first thing we did was we went into his warehouse and we checked his books, and he was not lying. It was true. But my thought was, well, what happens if he gets new clients or it's a busy, you know how it is on I mean, I don't know if how many of you live near a resort community. Yeah, I'm in New York, but we're not far from, we live near the Jersey Shore. You get now everything is like alive because you get a July 4th weekend and your clients are calling you and they're selling out because the place is packed and you can't deliver more goods. I don't think that's a good way to run a business. I'm not saying you have to have tons of inventory, but 52 times a year means that to me, you're more focused on saving money than making sure that you're maximizing your revenue. And I tell you, a postscript to that story was that he had salespeople. He had I don't know, 7 or 8 salespeople. And the way the deal worked was, if you made so much in sales, I'm going to make this number up, but let's say you make, because this is a while ago now, let's say you make $50,000 in sales that year, that month. He'd pay your car lease, but you had to hit that 50,000. And he said, I'll tell you a story. I've had salespeople who finished the month at 48 or 49. They don't get the payment till the following month. I don't know that that's the way to run it. Now, rules are rules. I get all of that. But that just, when you put it all together, that's not a way to run a rodeo in my mind. But anyway.
That would be a good idea, no question. We don't want to carry a lot of inventory. It could be dead weight on the shelves or for an auto dealer in the parking lot. But on the other hand, if I'm not carrying enough inventory, my clients might not like that idea. They may want to see choices. You walk into a store, you want to see choices. Otherwise, what was the benefit of getting in a car and going to the mall or going and looking at a car deal? So you have to be careful when you look at these numbers. Not to use them absolutely, but to use them relatively and to make them the starting point of the questions that you ask. Another one is accounts payable, accounts receivable, accounts payable. Of course, we'd like to delay our payables as much as possible. But on the other hand, we don't want our suppliers to start wondering if we can make our payments. That may look bad with your reputation in the industry. So all of these things have to be taken into effect and into thought when you're looking at different issues. So another one that I like to point out is the asset turnover number here, number 9, when net sales over average total assets. Again, a number you would want to see two companies. One company has a high asset turnover, another one, company B, has a low asset turnover. Obviously, we would want to take a look at company A because we think that's a better idea, but we might find out that company B had just put in new factories, new production facilities, in which case that would make their net sales over average total asset would lessen it, right? You have a higher denominator. But it also means that company B has new stuff, that they can be more effective, they can be more efficient, that in the future they're prepared for, take for instance a production facility that's been revamped. It's going to be a more efficient facility that'll be around a lot longer, where company A has old equipment and they're going to be paying that price at one point. They haven't upgraded, So again, asset turnover is a number where it just starts to question. Doesn't kind of, obviously, if you look at it over the course of the whole industry, you get a better idea of where it should be. And in the end, what ultimately matters, debt ratios are important, times interest is important, but earnings per share, that's where you really know what the market values at. And I like that. And price earnings ratio is the most important, I feel, because it's what the market thinks. It's where the market is betting their money. And if the average price earnings ratio right now is around 25, which implies about 1 divided by 25 is a 4% return on the market is requiring your stock to return 4%. Well, if it's higher than that, then the market obviously feels your earnings are going to grow and that you're in a better competitive position. And if it's lower than that, then they think that you're a mature company, and you may want to look into why they feel that way. So if you're gauging a company, price earnings ratio is really an important number. So that's just a preview of where I want to head with this.
Okay, first, before I go any further, any questions? Any questions by my friends here? Okay, so let's look at the work. Let's look at the actual work design. Now, of course, once again, I'm going to say you guys have been doing great. I gave you I've given you some examples, so you could use them. Feel free to use them. And I don't give you the examples, and I've said this before to just give you the homework. I give it to you so you can give me the idea and analyze, because that's what you're doing here. You learn how to be an analyst, and then you're learning something. You're not spending your whole day doing X's and O's. So when analyzing financial statements, the reader looks for a company's liquidity, profitability, or solvency. Every item reported on the financial statement has significance. To make a proper analysis of the financial statements, we need something to compare the numbers to. Does the cash represent an increase over prior years? Is it adequate in relation to the company's need for cash? Is 100 million in cash? Great. But did the number increase from last year? So within a company, such as comparing the year's financial prior years, so you want it when you do certain comparisons, you really want to look at your peer group. Like, you don't want to compare Boeing Air to Coca-Cola, two different businesses. Compare Coca-Cola to maybe Coca-Cola really doesn't have a peer group, but you wouldn't want to compare, say, for instance, you compare it to Pepsi. Nah, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, of course. But you wouldn't want to compare an automaker to a defense contractor. So you want to find companies in your industry and you want to compare them. And then you also want to use, some common sense and make sure that you're comparing them correctly. Then you also want to look at what's happening in your company. So think about that. That's two different types of comparisons. So you do a horizontal analysis, and you're going to be doing that in your assignment. And in a horizontal analysis, you're looking at 1 year versus another. So you're looking intra-company. You're looking in your company. What happened with cost of goods sold? Now, in this particular one, if I'm an analyst, what's jumping out at me is administrative expense. It's up 13%. So I'm asking that question. Why more money on administration? Is there a reason? Do we benefit from it? Does it help sales? Was it something we didn't have and needed today? And I notice interest expenses down considerably, so that might be a question. And that's the benefit of horizontal analysis. You could look 1 year to the next. Notice even income taxes went up, and they went up higher than sales, which is my revenue. That might be a question too. Like, what happened to the tax rate? Did I go into did the taxes go up? I mean, those are things you would ask as an analyst. But we call it horizontal because we're going across. right? The horizon. But vertical analysis is a little different. Vertical analysis means we're looking up and down, and we're looking always as a percentage of sales. So we want to see that if certain expenses and revenues as a percentage of sales have changed, we want to be aware of why that happened. And then we want to look for trends. So in horizontal analysis, we want to look for different trends in terms of things that are moving, that's new to us, new differences. And that may be very explainable. Of course, when you're doing this type of analysis, you have to look at it in the context of the economy too. So for instance, let me ask the panel a question. What's one thing that we're dealing with right now in our economy that you're all aware of? I'm sure you're all aware. What is one factor that we're dealing with in the macro economy? What's one thing you're aware of that we're dealing with in the macro economy? I'm sure you're all aware. Feel free to answer.
The cost of gas?
Perfect. Who said that?
That was Angela.
Excellent, Angela. Of course, the gas, well, more to the point, inflation. If you've been to the supermarket, or like Angela said, you've been to the gas pump, or you've been anywhere, everything's just more expensive. I mean, that's just the way it's been post-COVID. Things are more expensive, right? Sometimes 20, sometimes 30%. We're all feeling it. Our utilities, or even our taxes, insurance. Well, as an analyst, you can't just ignore that. That's got to be something that you have to factor in when you do your analysis, okay? And so you can't just look at it, while you look at it for the company, you get to kind of get to know the company and get to know those trends. You also want to bake in what you're reading. And that's why I always say, make sure you read that Wall Street Journal every day if you get a chance. It's not a prerequisite to passing my class. It's not. I would never do that. But I'm saying as a professional who's been doing this forever, and that's why I have this, I want this job and I like this job. This is something that's invaluable. Now, you don't have to get it, I get it delivered every day because I am an old guy. But you don't have to you can get it delivered. I mean, you get a student subscription using your Rasmussen email. I'm not even sure if it works if Rasmussen doesn't have their own access. I'm not sure about that. But you can get a student subscription, or and that would cost like $50 every 6 months. It's not nothing, but it's not a lot of money. It's it's 3-4 trips with the kids to McDonald's nowadays. But you get the online access, and every day there's information, every single day. So are you seeing the Wall Street Journal? Am I sharing it?
Yes, we can see it.
I know. So every day you're getting this news and what's happening in the markets and all the different headlines. And believe it or not, even personal finance. Believe me, I wouldn't push it if it wasn't a good thing. And you'll find that reading this paper every day, not only it's going to make you better at analyzing your own finances and your business, you're just going to become better at it, and you'll be a better communicator. Not that you're bad communicators, but you become even better because now you're reading articles that are written by professionals. Look a lot on mortgages. So there's so much information here, and I don't get paid by the Wall Street Journal. But the point is, since I was in high school, we started reading it, and Wall Street, you're reading it all the time. I mean, it's like your Bible. And I got to be honest with you, working in the business all those years, you're working with some pretty wealthy guys, and oh my gosh, this thing brings, and you're working with some pretty wealthy guys and people, and they're reading this stuff like it's a religion. So, of course, that's something you pick up on, and so I always feel that there are things that you learn when you're in certain areas that other people don't know. It's like being a baseball player or being, I mean, I love sports. I played sports my whole life. It's like my family's been in professional golf. There are things you're going to know as a professional because you got to make a living. This is not playing on Saturdays that the regular person isn't going to know because they're just not doing it every day. It's like being a professional chef. There's things a chef knows. I'll never forget. I knew a chef. He was a great guy, and we were talking about one day. He was just a friend of mine. He was a great guy to talk to too. And he says, you know, people love pancakes, right? He says people love pancakes, and a lot of times everybody makes pancakes, and who doesn't love pancake, right? He said, and they'll make the batter and they'll just pour it, and what they don't understand is for a couple of dollars you can just buy this little device that just you squirt it and there's a uniform pancake. He says, now he worked, I think, at what's the place that had the ice cream? Not Applebee's. Just can't think about it, but they served ice cream and everything. It's a nice place. That was one of his jobs. He said, well, if you get that little device, it's what is it? You buy it on Amazon for $5 or $6 or $10. But he said, now every time you make pancakes, the pancakes are uniform. Not only do they taste better or they look nicer in a presentation, but now they're cooking evenly. So you don't have to worry which one's cooking quicker than the next. You get a better pancake. And it sounds like but that's something only a pro knows. Or then I know he worked at P.F. Chang's for a while. And he said the one thing they told him at P.F. Chang's, he says, we cut all our own vegetables. It came out, but we prep it. He says, the one thing that's great about working in a Chinese restaurant, you learn you don't overcook the vegetables because that's where all the vitamins are. People want a crunchy vegetable. He goes, and it makes it tastier. Because if you overcook the vegetables, you've got a problem as the chef. Your manager has a problem. So, yeah, I know these things sound like, they're important because there's just better ways to do things. Well, you learn that when you're a professional, right? You learn that when you're a professional in anything. I'm sure you could tell me the same stories about the things that you guys do. So yeah, the paper is important. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to minimize that. $50 a month. And what I do in the morning, I just check into it. It may be later. And on the weekends, some of the stuff you get on personal finance, you can even get the arts. Look, I'm not here to say the Wall Street Journal. But I'm telling you, that's what pros do. And you'll enjoy it after a while. And after a while, the articles start to continue. It's like a soap opera or a baseball team. It's the same stories. They just keep going. So you don't have to read them. Oh yeah, I remember that story. This is what's happening. A lot of stories today are about AI. Can't believe how many AI stories, but that's what's in business. Now, there are different ratios, and we kind of touched on that. There are liquidity ratios. How liquid is your company? You have enough cash on the books. Usually we use a current ratio, which means how much cash do we have versus our short-term liabilities. Why is that important? Because you need cash. You know that. A lot of this stuff is stuff that you're already dealing with. Even if you have you bought your house and you have a reasonable mortgage, if you have cars in the driveway that has a small loan or no loan at all, it's great. You have some money in your 401k, tremendous. But if you don't have enough cash flow coming in, that could be a headache. Cash flow is important. So the long story short is it's just as important for a company. So always think about Bed Bath & Beyond. We had one right near us. I'm more of a guy who likes to shop. I like doing food shopping, and I'm an Italian, right? I guess that's part of my DNA. So my wife, she's Italian too, but I don't never mind going out and do some food shopping. But the other kind of shopping, clothes and that stuff, I'm not huge on that. But every once in a while, if we needed stuff, my wife would say, let's go to Bed Bath & Beyond. It was right near our house. And I thought it was a good store. I didn't mind going because it was, a lot of interesting things, kitchen stuff, things like that. I thought it was a nice store, right? Well, the long story short, they ran out of cash. And once they ran out of cash, the problem started for Bed Bath & Beyond. Because now your suppliers worry that they're not getting paid and they don't supply you, and you don't want to go in a store where there's no supply. So liquidity is important in life, in business. I always tell my students, always take care of your cash flow. Start with your cash flow. Once your cash flow is secure, then you can take chances. Profitability ratios. How profitable is your firm? We've been talking about that. We've been talking about return on equity. How much did my investors put into this company and what are they making on that equity? And solvency. Am I paying my debts on time? Okay, so we have things like current ratios. Sometimes we take the inventory out if they're really like it's old inventory. We take that out of our current assets. Sometimes you don't take it out. If you're a jeweler, I wouldn't take out current ratio. I wouldn't take out inventory because that's something I could turn into cash, gold, and if I have gold on the books. But if I'm like a company selling fruit and vegetables, I take that out. You want to look at how often you're covering your debt. How often are you turning over the money that you loaned? We talked about that. And how often is your inventory turning over? Profitability ratio, how profitable are you? How often are you turning over assets? What's your return on equity? What's your earnings per share? Very important number. Because remember, what is stock? When we say, well, I bought stock. Well, it's a company sold you part of their company and they divided it into shares. So if a company has 100 million shares outstanding, that means there's 100 million, they divided their company up by 100 million pieces or shares. Well, what's each share getting in earnings? Well, if it's $3 a share, well, first of all, we know at 3 times 100 million, they have 300 million in earnings. But we also know that they're earning $3 a share. If the shares are trading at $100 a share, it's a 3% return. If shares are turning at $50 a share, it's a 6% return. So earnings per share is important. I think price earnings ratio is an important number because that tells me what the markets are doing. So sometimes we get companies that have $10 in earnings and they're paying, say, $100 for the stock. It's 10 times, they're paying 10 times earnings. We know now, and this is a number I follow very closely as a professional, I'm going to call up Yahoo Finance. We know now that the markets trade at about almost 25 to 30 times earnings. So that's something you want to pay attention to. Because if it's trading at 25 times earnings, that means investors are paying 25 times $1 of earnings, which is about a 4% yield, right? If I'm paying $25 for $1 of earnings, I'm getting a 4% yield. That concerns me because you're getting 4% by investing in the market, maybe 4.5%, and I can buy a 10-year treasury for 4.5%. So what I'm being told, in general, this is a very general idea. So you're telling me that I can earn 4.5% by giving the money to the government for 10 years, but that I could earn, that's what I get if I put the money with the S&P 500, which is a broad cross section of U.S. industries. So, oh, that concerns me. That's a number that I'm not the only guy who gets concerned. There are other people who are professionals who worry about that. Look at this. The 10-year bond is 4.65%. I can do better by giving it to the government. Now, that doesn't account for growth and everything else, but I'm using that 5% number maybe with the S&P. That's with growth. And then you can call up individual stocks. So let's say Coca-Cola. And any stock you call up, look at that. There's your PE. 25 times earnings. It trades just like the market. And there's your EPS, 318. And there's your dividend rate. So all these numbers are available to you. You got to just know where to look. And this way, when you're buying a stock or you're interested in something, you do your own research. Of course, always read the research that you could find. Like, for instance, if you have a Charles Schwab account or a Fidelity account, they have research. Read it. Buy stocks the way you buy anything. The way you buy it. Now, we have a dishwasher that's on the fritz. I mean, it's not draining properly. So my wife and I are like, all right, let's just make sure we put some money aside because pretty soon we're going to have to replace it. But I'm looking at different dishwashers. I'm going to, now I found Costco as a good site. And I'm doing the research. We're both looking at it. What do we want? How much do we want to spend? Blah, blah, blah. Well, why do we do that with an appliance, but we don't do it with a stock? And these are numbers now you could look. And remember something else. And I always say this to my students. Now you're the educated one. At one point, you're gonna be done with all of this stuff and you're gonna have a nice degree. Well, now you're the person giving advice out. You're the person that your nephews or your nieces or your children or your friend or your spouse want information. Hey, how does that work? Well, this is where you find it, by reading the papers, by doing the research. And there's a lot of information out there. Look at this, even in Yahoo Finance, which is free. I mean, you could pay for some things, but they've got personal information. Just got to know where to look. Yeah. Just got to know where to look. Okay. And then you got this interactive learning experience, which I'll let you do. Right. All right. The assessment. Here's the example. You call it up and download. And there's your, what you'll see when you download it is most of your information is ready that you're going to need. Sometimes students say, do you want me to copy it? Look, I gave you the information because I want you to analyze it. That's why I did it. The same way I analyzed it for you. So you could tell me what you would be looking for when you're helping our friend. I love this class, I got to tell you. They give it to me all the time. And I'm kind of glad. So, for instance, here's my video, by the way. I threw it in there. When you do your assessment, remember, you're an advisor, so you're gonna create this, and you're gonna put it together, and you're gonna write in a Word document, a memo to Alex. So please remember, when you're speaking to Alex, explain it to him the way I explained it to you. So let's listen to Alex for a minute, my man.
Hi, it's Alex from Ground Up Cafe. Thanks to your help, I now have my first set of financial statements, but I still have a big question on my mind. Can my cafe cover its short-term debts? I want to be sure that Ground Up Cafe has enough assets to handle its current obligations and still keep the business running smoothly. For this assignment, I need you to analyze my financial data using 3 approaches: horizontal analysis to compare this quarter to last year, vertical analysis to see how each item stacks up against total sales or total assets, and ratio analysis to calculate my working capital and current ratio. Once you've done the calculations, write me a short memo that explains whether I have enough liquidity to pay off my short-term debts and how you reached your conclusion. With your help, I'll be able to get a clearer picture of my cafe's financial health and make smarter decisions moving forward.
Okay, so that's it, Rio. Any questions? Any questions, my friends here? Any questions?
Not yet, but as always, once I get into the assignment, there may be some that come up.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for. The key word is ratio analysis. You know that. And of course, it's always, you have a question, you just ask me. Never worry about that. That's done. But yeah, that's about it. Interesting, but when you're doing ratio analysis, the most important thing you got to remember is you're going to compare it to your industry. You're going to compare it to previous years. You're going to look for trends. There's a lot of stuff that's going to go on behind the scenes that you're going to do to do a better job with it. But the bottom line is it's not terribly difficult. It's just something you have to get used to. And by taking a class like this, you start to understand. Are you going to become a CPA? If you become a CPA, obviously you got to get more steeped in the stuff that you have to do. But if you're going to go into business, what the main thing you want is to understand when you're being told something, what it is you're being told. So before I wrap it up, any questions? Well, if there are no questions, as always, you guys are delightful. I'll see you next Wednesday. I will, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a YouTube and make sure it's in in the content, and I'll put it on the messages. And I appreciate you showing up. It's always a pleasure, and I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.